We're going to call this meeting to order. Thank you all for coming. Welcome. I don't have any announcements.
Very good. Well, thanks for reconvening one more time. Last time we met was about 2 weeks ago, and Mr. Palmer had asked if we can schedule another meeting so we can have some other information passed on, and we definitely had passed on more information to the board. We had Commissioner Dethridge, she asked for some information, and we made sure she got it, and then we gave you guys the latest draft of the request for proposal. There was some changes and some corrections made that were pretty small. There's a few other things I think we might need to still tweak. Mr. Hillman had actually sent us an email in regards to the radio tower, and that might be something we might need to make a tweak on, but I think it's a pretty fixable situation. So, but before we get started with all that, I wanted to make sure that we understood why we're here. In the bigger scope, and this actually goes back to the situation with Clapp Golf Course, that our financial situation with the Golf Enterprise Fund is in really bad situation. We are losing money. We've lost money for the past 3 years. We haven't made any debt payments in the past 3 years, and it's only looking like it's going to get worse and worse. We have more golf courses than what we have golfers coming to use our golf courses. There is a lot of overhead that we're carrying. There's a lot of infrastructure repairs that need to be made. And we always want to make those reinvestments back into all of our facilities to make them first class. And right now we are not able to do that. The way the Golf Enterprise Fund works is that we use proceeds or the revenues from all the golf activities to go back into the Golf Enterprise Fund and to go back into the infrastructure. In the past several years, we have not been able to do that. We actually have been using general fund dollars, and that, if you recall, that we purchased, what was it, 350 golf carts? 242 golf carts. And
With forestry.
that's correct, the general fund dollars.
Yeah.
Yes. So that's how dire we're in this situation. And again, to continue with what the mayor's wishes were to continue with the operations of Clapp, I think we're in the tune of about $425,000 of general fund dollars to carry that portion for the golf course. So to kind of share some information, I have Mr. Mark Manning here from Finance. He has a PowerPoint that is going to kind of illustrate some of the challenges that we've had, illustrate some of this financial situations that we're in, and kind of what the forecast is if we don't make some changes or if we do make changes. So I'm going to let Mr. Manning share some information.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Mark Manning with the Department of Finance. Thanks for inviting me. Troy asked me to give you a brief update today on the financial situation of the golf system. Now, what he didn't tell me was that he basically was going to make my presentation in his introductory remarks, so he's pretty much said everything I was going to say, but I'll still continue.
It means more from you than it does from me.
A lot of this may be redundant. Some of this we've talked about before for quite some time, but I think it's important that I relay this message to you. All of our courses continue to operate pretty much as we had forecasted, which, as you know, is not particularly good. LW Clapp is continuing to operate at a substantial loss. As you know, it has lost money for the last 3 years, and we expect that to continue. And probably most importantly, my last point there, I would say maybe somewhat sobering, but based on our current operating strategies, funding for equipment and improvements, in my opinion, is going to be a secondary concern for the golf system. The primary concern is going to be how to have adequate funding to keep the doors open, so to speak, and to actually operate the courses. So that's kind of the dichotomy in my presentation. I want to focus on two things. One is having adequate cash flow to keep the doors open. The second problem is improvements, debt service, and all of that. Because if you can't do the first one, you don't need to worry about the second one. So let's look at operating cash flow. And I'm not an accountant, and I don't want to pretend to be an accountant, but operating cash flow is just all the operating revenue we get from greens fees and golf carts and concessions and stuff like that. The operating expenditures are the people, the utilities, the things of that nature to operate the clubhouses and to maintain the courses. So if you take the operating revenue and subtract the operating expenditures, you're going to get what we would call our operating cash flow. So let's look at what that's been over the last, if I go back to 1988, so the last 31 years here. So the blue line there shows what our operating cash flow has been. And you can see over our history, it has been quite good in a number of years. You can also see it's been relatively volatile. Of course, we know why that is because it's a lot of weather dependency. But our cash flow has been very good for a long period of time until you get to the right-hand side of the chart over there. And this area here in particular, last 5 years, I would point out to you, total cash flow in the last 5 years, operating cash flow has been about $368,000 over 5 years. In fact, our cash flow in 17 and 16 was negative, and we expect it to be negative again in 2018. And I would point out to you those 3 years of negative cash flow that are circled there are my records only go back to 1977, but those are the first 3 years since 1977 that I'm aware of in which we had negative cash flow. So what's the impact of negative cash flow? Well, the impact is not good. It means we erode our reserves. We do have reserves, but they are eroding and eroding fast. So when you erode your reserves, what does that mean? That means you have a lot less flexibility. It means your planning might shift away from strategic and more to tactical, which is generally not a good thing. And you're obviously familiar with the second bullet there. Lower reserves means it limits our funds available for capital investment, and it tends to lead to asset deterioration, which can get into a vicious cycle, which we don't want to go into. So let's look at the fund performance. Again, your operating cash flows there in the middle of the chart. That's what it was in 16, 17, and 18, and 66,000 to the negative in 16. Last year was about 188,000 to the negative. 2018 is what I would estimate at this point. Of course, golf's difficult to estimate, but I did the best I can based on what we would expect in the fourth quarter. So I would tell you today that I would expect the golf system to have an operating deficit in 2018 of about $162,000. Now, we do have a few other cash flows, and that's primarily the sale of land. You'll recall we sold some lots, I think, out at Auburn Hills. That's what that 81,000 represents there. But let me give you another takeaway on this slide right here. I've circled some of the stuff Troy talked about. I've circled the debt service amount paid in the last 3 years, which you can see is all zeros. And I've circled the new improvements equipment amount, which you can see, and I don't recall what we bought in 2017, but you can see $9,987 in the last 3 years. That's, probably not what we need to replenish our equipment and make the improvements necessary. So I'll finish up here shortly. I just wanted to go over the courses. Again, performance at LW Clapp continues to deteriorate. The other 4 courses generally are operating about as we would have expected. You would have seen this chart in the Golf Sustainability Report. I think it's Exhibit H or F or something like that in the back. So 15 through 17 you can find there. Again, all I've done is updated 2018 with what I think probably will happen based on what I see to date. And again, you can see we would expect LW Clapp to continue the losses and probably lose more than it did last year. And you can see that we would expect the other courses, based on where we're at today, to operate fairly virtually the same how they did last year. So again, that's the call and focus on there. So let me summarize the last 5 years. The system's lost money in 2 of the last 5, 2016 and 17. For the last 5 years, I'm talking about 2013 to 2017. So the system's lost money in 2 of those 5 years, probably will lose money this year. 4 of the last 5 years are the worst years that the golf system has had since my record keeping begins, which is 1977. In other words, our trend is downward. LW Clapp has lost money every year in this 5-year period since 2013 and will again in 2018. System has no capacity to fund improvements or equipment, has no capacity to fund debt repayments, and I talked about cash reserves. At the end of last year, the cash reserves sat at $278,500. $536. What should cash reserves for a fund like the Gulf Fund be? I don't want to go into the nuances of how we set reserve levels, but I would tell you they probably should be close to $1 million. So the fund is significantly under-reserved, and I told you previously I would expect the fund to lose about $160,000 this year. So what I'm telling you is, in my estimation, I would expect fund reserves by the end of this year to be somewhere just north of $100,000. Finally, this is my wrap-up. The challenges that the Gulf system has to continue current operations, if nothing changes, I would tell you probably is going to require about $500,000 a year. Again, just to use round numbers. And again, that's, you heard that number back in August or July, whenever the discussion on that occurred. To fund debt service based on the most recent refinancing agreement that was approved, which has been several years ago, we really need $286,000. And as you know, in the Gulf Sustainability Report, it identified needed capital improvements of about $26.4 million. Now, you can argue whether that's the appropriate number or not, but whether it is or isn't, it's obviously a very large number. So those are the challenges that I see. That's the end of my presentation. Again, a lot of this may be redundant, but Troy asked me to give you a little overview, so that's what I've done. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them. But
Anybody on the board have a question?
So to follow up on that, I just want to emphasize that a lot of this is due to the diminishing amount of golfers. We don't have as many golfers as we used to have. And I think this would be a whole lot worse if we didn't have the quality staff that we have that is working hard to make this happen. We've changed a lot of our marketing strategies. We've tried a lot of different other ideas in regards to discounts and different other kind of mechanisms to get people to come out, and they've been some increases. I think we've had more youth coming out and using our golf courses. There's definitely been some other bright spots in regards to we're adding more tournaments. But also the other thing is that as we did discounts, that means the dollars per round go down. So that means we're losing money as well. So there's definitely something that needs to change. We cannot operate and be sustainable in this situation. So I just want to emphasize that we are really at the very end of our rope here. We are on a skeleton crew. We have actually cut back a lot of the positions. There's folks that are working way beyond their expectation that we would have for somebody in these positions, working extra hours, working extra efforts to make things happen. So I give it to staff. They are working their butts off to make it successful and trying new ideas. Everything from our online presence to our app, which has been really successful. We're trying a lot of different things, and I think if we didn't do any of those things, we would have seen this happen a lot sooner.
How long have we been dealing with this? 8 years, is that right?
So I can tell you from my perspective, when we first got on board 4 years ago, these are things we started talking about 4 years ago, from my perspective. I don't know how far back this goes, but I think there's definitely been conversations that go back before my time.
Okay. First one, is there anybody out here that wants to make comment not on this agenda? All right, just want to make sure no one's here for that. We'll go into, we're going to bring it to the table then, and obviously Scott is going to go over the RFP again and the changes that we've talked about in the last meeting and any.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Again, I was here a week already, 2 weeks? Can't remember what it was.
Week and a half. Yeah.
Week and a half. Seems like longer, but that's all it is. You should have received, hopefully Troy sent out to you yesterday an updated RFP based on some of the feedback we received at the last meeting, obviously changing it to Parks Board versus the City of Wichita. We clarified 18-hole public golf course. We clarified a couple other minor details, but in essence, I'm happy to go through it page by page as we did last time, or else I'm happy to take questions. Again, the goal is to provide an opportunity for respondents to understand the requirement to A, that they have to maintain it as an 18-hole public golf course, that open view fencing would be required, that they have to honor or abide by the first tee agreement dated March 14th, 2018, I think Troy has an update on the Horizon telecommunication. That's technically park property, but the actual lease with the telecom company is actually with the city of Wichita. The property is served by water lines, and then we go through, if in the event that the potential buyer buys it and for whatever reason isn't performing or doesn't doing right, the city has, or the Parks Board has the opportunity as a right of first refusal to purchase the property back. The cautionary note we provided to the Park Board last time is we may get to that point where the property owner has bought it, has operated, and it's not in a condition, they close it for whatever reason. The Park Board needs to have the opportunity either to go ahead and repurchase it or decide we don't want to purchase it. It may be in worse condition than what we sold it in, so that's a consideration to take into effect. And then again, on the last page, you'll see there that if they put a proposal, they have to provide the 10% earnest money. Obviously, if they're not selected, that 10% would go back to them. I think with that, we updated the dates. I'm open to questions at this point or suggestions.
Hey, go ahead.
I would just ask Troy if that, the changes that I've made to the recommendation on the cell tower regarding the Park Board will retain ownership of this site at Mac Park rather than and?
Yeah.
Okay, because that makes a big difference. If you sold it, you can't retain ownership. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Also wanted to add, there was a question from the last time we met in regards to the proceeds of the sale and where would those proceeds go? And as staff, obviously it's your decision. That depends on what you guys decide because it is your property where it goes, but staff is making a recommendation that those proceeds go back to the Golf Enterprise Fund, specifically for investments into the remaining golf courses. So
Yeah, 'cause we have 26 million in deferred maintenance, is that right?
I wouldn't call it necessarily deferred maintenance. I would call it repairs, upgrades, infrastructure repairs. So it's broader than deferred maintenance. Deferred maintenance, to me, it kind of describes that as something that we couldn't address or we didn't address. But in addition, to have quality golf courses, we need to put money back in for newer items and upgrades to those systems as well. So I call it that a little bit a wider net than deferred maintenance.
Okay.
Okay.
Any questions on the board here? So right now, we only have 2 people that would like to talk. I'll call your name. You have 5 minutes. We have to give 5 minutes to talk. Make sure you please state your name and address. And we'll start with Jason. Jason.
Hello, my name is Jason Fulgham, and I've played at various public courses for most of my life, mainly McDonald. In this discussion, I would like to see it more proactive than reactive. As far as I've talked to friends, even one guy that works at McDonald, about, when I lived in Kansas City, they had a website called lastminutegolfer.com. How that worked was certain tee times throughout the city of Kansas City are hard to sell. Those are discounted the morning of. Now, there is something similar here in Wichita, but for some reason, none of the city courses are involved in it. You can get a discounted rate at Sand Creek and Newton. You can go to Cherry Oaks. You can go wherever, but the city doesn't want to be part of it. And I don't get it. I mean, it's a good way to get golfers out there. And you speak about we need more golfers. Another thing that I've seen with younger golfers, a program called First Tee. It's helping get inner city kids that aren't going to be exposed to golf at the courses. And I know they're doing something big at McDonald. I want to say it's a driving range. I know First Tee's a big part of that. And my whole point is I think there needs to be more proactive things, ideas to, and like my other point is, you know, the potential buyer, there's a reason why he wants McDonald. He doesn't want Clap. He doesn't want any of the public courses. McDonald used to be Wichita Country Club. It's the best layout of a golf course in the city. If you ask most golfers that live on the east side, where do they play? Maybe some play Clap. You don't have Braybird anymore. You don't have Echo Hills. You play McDonald. McDonald has a lot of history. It's a great location. It's, you know, I've never played Auburn Hills. I play golf probably 2 or 3 times a month. I've heard bad things, I've heard good things, but I've played Tex Consolver. I would hate for the city, because I think of the public courses, your biggest asset is McDonald. If you want to buy lots or sell lots, I would say Auburn Hills property value is much more than 13th and Oliver. That's nothing against that neighborhood, but I can tell you the homes are going to go, your prices are going to be better out west. That's, I mean, if you guys have anything back to me as far as if you've heard of any of these programs, the last minute golfer thing was something I like to do in Kansas City because, you know, I don't have the finances to join a country club or play, you know, the nicer courses, but it was a way for people to get out. And if you look, your rates at a Wichita public course are the same at Saturday at 9:30 as Tuesday at 2 o'clock. You can sell those for more on a weekend than you can on a public or on a weekday. Just some ideas. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Does our app take care of that?
Dale?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dale Goter, 2625 West Cornelison. In the course of this discussion, we've engaged a group to look at this issue. We call it the Wichita Public Golf Ad Hoc Committee. I passed out a little report we did. We've met for many, many hours. We really want to be a part of the solution. We don't want to be a part of the problem, but there are a lot of questions that we couldn't answer, so we put them in this document to submit to you. I talked to Mark on his way out. He answered a lot of those questions. There's some information that we didn't have that might have changed our questions. The chart he showed where the history of golf having had a great era of revenues, we had heard that some of that money had been diverted in the past. He said that's not the case. It's always been reinvested in the system and paid off the improvements at Sim and McDonald in previous years. That's fine. So that's one question that we're a little more comfortable with now. I was interested to hear that Auburn Hills has lots for sale. I didn't know that we own property out there that is a revenue source. I don't know how many are left and what that asset is at this point. The issue of Auburn and the revenue generated from that development over the years is one we've talked about, that the justification for the city to contribute to the public golf system could be made that the property tax revenue from Auburn Hills was so in excess of what was predicted. It was so successful that the city really profited a great deal with that revenue. That didn't go back into the golf course, obviously. So there's one of the items that's left on our agenda is that if you'd consider supporting a dedicated public subsidy that would allow the courses to be sustainable. So you're not running it like purely an enterprise fund. That's very difficult, very hard to expect it to make that kind of money year in, year out without given the public service that's provided by a golf course, economic development, quality of life that are different from a country club. So those are things just to consider. In our report, the main recommendation we make is that we would like to think you would delay this RFP process until this overall study of the system's been conducted. Your Golf Advisory Committee recommended that to you. You kind of glossed over that. It would have been nice, a little more discussion about that, why that was the recommendation. But nonetheless, as a compromise, because some of our folks see some merit in looking at the RFP, as a compromise, we said if you could do that concurrently, do the RFP if you'd like, do it in a much more comprehensive fashion than we saw the first go-around. I assume this one does address some of those issues, but at the same time, undertake this evaluation of the system. One key point some of our members have talked about is perhaps it's time to think about bringing in an outside objective consultant to look at the operation, to maybe discuss different models of operation that might generate more rounds. One in particular that we've talked about is perhaps more emphasis on social golf. When I moved to Wichita in 1989, I learned to play golf with people. I always played pretty much by myself or 2 or 3 friends. When I moved here, I learned about the value of playing with men's clubs, tournament groups, leagues, that kind of thing. And in a discussion we had yesterday with the mayor and the manager, it became fairly obvious that perhaps we're not doing as much about that as we might, that having a more aggressive effort to engage those groups who are out there playing, support them, encourage them, and try to drive rounds up in that fashion. We're all about the same goal in the end. We want more people playing golf, so there's more revenue, so we have a system that is viable and continues forward. We'd like you to think about forgiving the Auburn debt. I know it's hanging out there, it's $5.6 million, but the city made so much money off of that development that it's not out of the question to say that would be appropriate to pay that off from those proceeds. The manager explained that has to come out of the CIP, so there's a compromise along the way. Somebody else gets shorted if you do that. We understand that, but that's just a point we'd like to see addressed. Mark raised a lot of great questions, but at the end of the day, we're not quite sure that everything's been done that could be done to generate golf rounds in Wichita. And we think this study, done perhaps with an outside entity, might identify some of those solutions that haven't been looked at this point. Social golf being one of them, tournaments, promoting more tournaments. One of our members is Rick Navarro, who every year organizes the Augie Navarro Memorial Tournament. It is the most spectacular tournament that you would find. He's raised $250,000 for golf scholarships for youth over the last few years. His history of interaction with the city has been less than ideal. We think you should have 20 of those tournaments. That'd be great, because rounds fill up golf courses, and that's where cash flow gets improved on. So it's just a suggestion about how you do that. A couple of other points, and cut me off when I get to 5 minutes. I didn't time myself, so I'll be happy to stop at any point. One issue we wonder about is the police fire reserve payment that's paid every year, $90,000, and we'd like to think about perhaps that one being considered for removal. Time up?
Yes, sir.
Thanks,
Thank
sir.
you. No one else wants to speak on this topic?
Did we down here to sign up? Can he have my extra 5 minutes?
Uh-uh. No, but you can go up there if you want.
Here's your channel, here's your show for 5 minutes. Can I speak?
Yeah, go ahead. Even though you're not on the list, you're fine.
Apologize for not being on the list. I was detained upstairs at the end of the meeting with questions. My name is Richard Schodorf. I live at 250 West Douglas, and I'm on the Golf Advisory Committee. And it was mentioned here before, and I've seen the projections as far as the situation of golf, and it has changed. I agree with Troy that golf in the United States is a different animal than it was a decade ago. One of the things that we believe that the system doesn't, the system as it's created right now, that it's organized and run, is not necessarily responsive to the way that it needs to be run as an enterprise fund. Decisions have to be made closer to the ground as to the expenditures that are being made and the way that the course is conducted as far as getting the most bang for the buck. There was a decision 4 years ago with regard to CLAP that had it been different, most of those numbers in that line would have been considerably different. And there were a variety of options, and the options of doing nothing was selected, and that really helped run us into a hole. We have a number of proposals that we are bringing forward. We're going to have a retreat of the committee, and we hope to interact with city staff to come up with proposals to this board that we think should be looked at from the standpoint of organization of the decision-making process for golf, and also the budget proposals on where the enterprise fund as revenue should be spent. I would agree, if we're going to run it as an enterprise fund, it should be run truly as an enterprise fund. And right now, it's kind of a mixed bag. Some of the money comes from the golfers, some of it comes from the city. We don't really have a clear picture of exactly what golf costs in the city of Wichita. I don't believe that the presentation, and I really like Mark, and that the figures he's showing is not a drilled down number. And I think we can get you a drilled down number. I think we could get you a proposal that will allow you to look at it on a go-forward basis to see whether or not the sale of McDonald is a good idea. I don't think we know right now. And so I would ask the park board to seriously consider the work that we're going to do in November, and to make sure that you have all the information you need in order to make that decision, because I really don't think those numbers are available right now. And I don't think that the proposals are available to you. It's kind of this is where we are and this is what we need to do. And I don't think that you're there yet. And so I'd ask you if you would allow us to have that time to bring back a proposal to the board. And I'd like to put a formal proposal to the board so that you'd be able to ask questions, so you have all the information. Thank you.
Richard, let me ask you a question. You say that the Golf Advisory Committee is prepared to do that. Why haven't you done it till now? I mean,
In
we've
the
been
last
talking
3
about
years,
this for-
we have voted on and sent up numerous resolutions and requests, and with maybe a few exceptions, we've never received any word down on anything we've done. We really believe that we've wasted our 3 years. This is our last-ditch attempt to try to make a change to the system. When the CLAP, we voted, we sent individuals out into the community, and we never received a single answer as to everything that we put forward, which was a complete plan on what to do, proposing the sale of that particular piece of property, what we would do with the money, how we think it would benefit. And we were in a position where that was just a proposal. We wanted dialogue. And we received no dialogue. We understand now, and we appreciate Mr. Fonestok's participation on the committee, and he does an excellent job, and Hoyt did before. But we're down here and you're up here. And so what we're doing right now is what I have been suggesting for 3 years, and that is we need to be relevant or we need to go away. You know, you appointed us to give you advice, and we really have been giving you advice. I'd like, if Troy could pull up all the different votes we've had a ton of them. We've got a proposal right now that would change the pass system. And we think that we've thought that through incredibly well. We think that will bring a lot more money to golf in Wichita. And we can explain why we think that's going to be a real revenue producer. And I think we're thinking somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000. We think, again, CLAP has to be repurposed. We have to shut off the red ink. We're not doing that. Those numbers reflect, and if you look at Mark's numbers, most of that red ink over the last 4 years is CLAP. And so how decisions get made under the golf board is you have a piece of the pie, the city finance has a piece of the pie, the park department has a piece of the pie, and there's no central area where we can come to get decisions made. We might suggest something to you. We don't hear from the city park department. There has to be a setup to where the golfers know what they're getting and what it is. If we're strictly a enterprise fund, and golf has to live within the budget of the enterprise fund, and we can debate, and as Dale said, the whole deal on Auburn Hills, and we had 200,000 rounds at Auburn Hills, in the city of Gulf, when Auburn Hills was built. It was thought to be a cash cow that needed to be milked. That isn't the case anymore. We paid back $15 million of the $20.5 million loan, or amount, and it shouldn't have been that high. You had $8 million that went for the renovation of the other golf courses, and then $12 million for Auburn Hills. Well, we paid off the 8, and we paid off most of the 12. But the problem is, going forward, you have to sit there and you look at golf as an enterprise and as a community activity. And it's like other community activities. And then you sit down and say, okay, what is the level of support that we think it should have? If it needs to be strictly an enterprise fund system, then you have to change the way you look at it. You cannot you can't have administrative costs that are nearly as high as ours are. It has to be able to bill out for services. The city could bill in for that. It would use the bid system. You have to hold your costs, and you have to say, this is the level we can afford to provide. That's what we're hoping to give you.
Richard, let me stop. How long do you think you say you have this proposal ready now?
No, we're going to have a retreat. We just voted on the date. We're going to have it
What
on
date?
the 27th.
Okay.
We hope to have something to you, I would say, by mid-December at the latest. After the retreat, the way these generally work, and we're inviting in city staff, because we don't want it to be dead on arrival. We don't want it to be pie in the sky. We really wanted to address reality on the ground, so that if we throw something out, we want city staff to say, no, it can't work that way. We want to make sure when it gets to you, it's feasible.
Okay, so would you be opposed, would the Golf Advisory Committee be opposed to an RFP going out, if this board decided to go out concurrent with you putting that together? And obviously, before any decision was made, we'd hear your recommendations.
That would be wonderful, because that would allow you, again, to have that kind of information that says, what we're hoping to do is break it down as, what would you look like as a 3-course system? What would you look at as a 4-course system? And what would you look at like as a 5-course system? How you can pay the bills, and quite frankly, a 5-course system is going to be kind of a hard rationale, but we're going to try to put it together because we think you deserve to know what it would look like. And again, is if we have the proposal and it has the same red ink in it, then obviously that isn't going to excite you much. But what we're hoping to provide you is information.
Okay, I think
Our
we
best
understand.
advice.
I think we understand. I think we need to decide if we put out an RFP concurrent with your guys' work. I'm assuming we could set the date, whatever we want to set the date. That way it gives you time to go to your retreat on the 27th and come back. How long after that, do you think? 2 weeks?
Yeah, but what I'd like to do is allow it to be sometime in about the middle of December, so that allows us to vote on a final proposal to provide to you.
How about by the December park board meeting?
When is that?
December
10th? Well, again,
No
you get to
pressure,
set
but
the
that way
rules,
we
and
don't have to have
so.
an extra meeting.
No, honestly, coming back to you, if we had a forum where we could actually have a dialogue with you, that's what we're really looking for. We're looking to be heard.
Okay.
So I'd like to make a suggestion. We've been working hand in hand, and I was a little, I don't know, I was a little surprised by your comment that staff has not been supportive of the Golf Advisory Committee. I think we've bent over backwards and worked really hard to have that communication and to host lots and lots of meetings and provide all the information that you've asked for and actually come up with ideas. And we spent a lot of time in dialogue and explaining a lot of the situations. So, but my suggestion is instead of having the retreat on the 27th, that we actually do that a little bit sooner so we can fit in this timeline a little bit better. So I know that's a little bit more work for staff, but I think that's something that I would like to suggest.
And if I may, just to respond to that, and Troy, you're absolutely right. But a lot of water went under the bridge before you ever got here. And we did a lot of voting in the first 2 years because, well, one of the things, I mean, when we were formed, one of the things that we were formed for is to look whether or not to issue an RFP, which we did, to have somebody else take over the system, which we did, looked at all the options, and then we said, not a great idea. So then we moved on to our second proposal, and that was trying to come up with an alternative to having somebody else run it. And that's where we hit the roadblock. And again, it wasn't the park department that wasn't, the staff provided a lot. In fact, Troy did a wonderful job at putting together a number of proposals. It's just that they never went anywhere and we never heard what happened to them. And so that's the communication line that we would like. This is what you're offering us. We would love to have it. I think, Troy, you're right. We need to move that up. But please, the remarks are not to be critical of the city park department or even the park board. It's the line of communication and the system, the way it's set up, that has to be changed because it's kind of like we've got a lot of cooks in the kitchen. And I don't think anybody's watching the store.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Could we go back to Garth Rainey's last page, the summary page of,
Do you want to go up and speak?
no, just the last page, that,
This is called opportunity zone.
the one with the course and their operating expenses right there. Okay, thank
I
you.
told you about this Tuesday. Basically, deferred capital payments for the next 10 years. And the 10-year pay a reduced capital.
So again, I would make the suggestion that as the Golf Advisory Committee and staff work to provide their plan prior to the closing of the RFP. And of course, I can only speak for staff. I can't speak for the Golf Advisory Committee.
Richard, are you good to speak for the Golf Advisory Committee with your comments? I don't know where he went.
Here,
Oh,
we have two of the members of the committee here, and Dharma or Cindy, did I say anything that you objected to as far as the proposal?
I would like, before we go on though, it looks like we're in the positive with those numbers, are we not?
Why don't you ask her to go up to the microphone?
Cindy, can you go up to the mic and state your name and address, please?
For the record, I told the members and the members that were here that made up the majority of our meeting today said that timeline would be fine to move it up and that find a date that is agreeable to our members, but some earlier date that allows us.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask Mr. Hendricks to make sure that happens, that we schedule some time, make sure that we have the retreat sooner than what we expected, but we'll also have all the information, all the data that they requested so we can put together that plan. So that plan should be completed prior to the closing of the request for the proposal.
But could we put just a question if this board was, can we send out the request for proposal if this board decides to and not make any decisions? It's due by the 10th, so obviously we wouldn't make a decision by the 10th, but, and kind of work with their proposal and this RFP if one comes in.
I mean, that's for you guys to decide how you want to evaluate that and how you want to put that into the request for proposals. But what I'm saying is, as staff and working with the Golf Advisory Committee, that will have whatever they want to present to you prior to the closing of the request for proposals.
So we need to move this date back.
No. What I'm saying is we're going to have our retreat
Yeah,
even
I
sooner.
understand that.
We're going to have all that
I understand
information
that.
even sooner. And if we need to, we'll bring that to the park board prior to the closing of the request for the proposal.
Okay, I understand.
Okay.
All right. Go ahead, Cindy.
Okay, one moment, please.
December 10th. December 10th. December 10th.
That's what I was trying to find out.
I'm coming up with a net positive on our operating margin of close to 300,000.
I don't think that includes all the internal charges that are put against the fund.
282 and 520,000. $282,520.
Are you asking a question, or are you?
Well, yes, when you said we're in the hole as the system, but with these numbers here that he has presented, we're $282,520 in the black.
So that's each individual golf course, their performance. I don't think that includes the whole entire golf enterprise system. Mr. Manning's still here. Would you please explain?
Yes, sir. Troy's exactly correct. All this is showing you is the performance of each of the 5 courses. What it is not showing you is the performance of the system. And the difference is the administrative costs that the golf system has. For example, we have a golf course manager that is not allocated to a course. We've got IT charges, we've got credit card charges. All those kind of charges are not allocated to each individual course. So that's the difference. But you are correct. If you add these up, you will get a surplus. But again, that's not particularly relevant because it doesn't show the admin costs that are necessary to run the system.
Thank you. If there's no more public comment has signed up, we'll bring it back to the bench if there's no one left. Any questions, comments, concerns, motion? Anybody want to make a motion?
I just have one question about the administrative expenses. I'm a little unclear on sort of the trend over time. Have those been around for many years since the system started, or has that has been ups and downs over the years?
They've always been included, and that's kind of the interesting thing about this is that the golf courses have always done very well. And so to me, that indicates that as we're moving forward in time, that we are not bringing in the golfers that we used to be bringing in. The expenses are the same. We've actually reduced a lot of our expenses because we have a lot less staff than what we used to have. We are reducing expenses in regards to updating equipment and making repairs. So all of our expenses are declining relative to inflation and relative to what the current costs are. So to answer your question, those administrative fees have been calculated the same way now as they were back in 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, yeah.
Any more questions?
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest concerns that I've heard so far is the potential for development on the area. And it keeps going back to the deed, but you can't even read half of the deed. So how can we get some clarification on or enforce it that it will not be developed on at any point of the course? Not just the holes, but not the clubhouse, the driving range, how can we make sure that development is not an issue?
Scott's going to answer that question for us.
Thank you.
So yeah, in reviewing the deed, our real estate group reviewed it. There's no deed restriction on the property right now. There was a deed when the transfer came from Wichita Country Club to the city, but that deed fell off. That deed restriction fell off. If you wanted to put a restriction on future development, that's an option. You can do that. I'll tell you as a cautionary note, obviously you could say, hey, in this area, we want no development to occur. It must remain a public golf course. But if you're going to put it out there for potential sale, and they have to retain the use as a public golf course, what you do want to have an opportunity in order to get the best return on the possible sale is, for example, if somebody wanted to do a reception center, which is very popular at golf courses, hey, come to your wedding, take pictures outside there, you could designate a certain area that would be available for development, and you could put, they have to go through the normal rezoning process for that use. So you get to do it that way. I know in the past, there was a question about it along 13th Street to restrict development. You could put that as a restriction that no redevelopment along the 13th Street frontage. But for example, where the clubhouse and there's some excess property down to that area, you could say that could be open for development. But you could even in that say no residential, no other uses other than, I'll call it complementary uses comparable to a golf course.
So we could put that in the RFP, whether the deeds of,
Put that into the contract.
or the contract, yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
I have one more question. So someone referenced hiring an outside consultant. I get the sense that internally we have a lot of expertise between staff and this committee. Has there ever been consideration for having outside eyes take a look at the system?
So when we first having discussions in regards to closing Clapper, we had talked about that suggestion. We were looking at the cost of what that was or could be. Obviously we'd have to go out there and find somebody and hire them. That just means less dollars for us to actually use for what we need to get done. Obviously, my opinion is very biased. I think we have fantastic staff. I think we have fantastic support. We have a fantastic committee that's helping us make these decisions. But we would always welcome, and there's nothing that we have anything to hide. If the funding was there, if somebody came up with the funding, I think we would be happy to have a consultant come in. But if you're asking me from my perspective, from our budget, I'd rather spend those dollars on something else.
Well, the gentleman who had spoken earlier talked about pricing to demand, and price on a Tuesday afternoon shouldn't be the same as a Saturday morning. I assume those kind of entrepreneurial ideas have been entertained in the past. And
Sure.
Okay.
We actually have early bird rates. We actually have late evening rates that have happened for specials. Something that we want to start incorporating with our app is at those demands, getting those prices out. So there's some things that we can improve on, but I think we have the capability and the foundation to make those things happen. We've worked really hard, very, very hard to try to find the right sweet spot where we're not losing money on giving discounts. But obviously there's times when there's nobody playing. Any kind of money coming in would actually be a great revenue. And so those are the things that we're working on. And these are things we've talked about over and over with the Golf Advisory Committee. And coming up with this pass idea, which some of the other folks have been, some of the other competitors actually have. But we have a guaranteed revenue stream if we have a pass. I think the proposed price is $65, and that would be a monthly fee, and you could play as much golf as you possibly want. And so we have that guaranteed revenue stream all year round. These are things that we've been working on for the past 6 months and trying to find new ideas to make our program more efficient and bring in more dollars when we most need them in the wintertime as well.
Troy, you mentioned that we haven't spent money on upgrading the courses or maintaining them over the last few years. Do we have, a list or plans for the upgrades and repairs necessary for all of the courses?
Yes, we do. Yeah. Whenever we get a gift, whenever we get extra cash, we have whenever we apply for grants, we've always looked at different ways of trying to bring in money to make those infrastructure upgrades and repairs. You can't use grants for operation, but you can use it for upgrades for your facilities. And then, obviously, last year was a great opportunity when we got the new golf carts, which was much needed. And because we had people that were, their carts were falling, their batteries were running dry in the middle of the course. And so we had to make some repairs. And so we actually ended up getting all those golf carts last year.
Troy, Richard said in his, when he was talking that we owe $5 million still on Auburn Hills, and made the suggestion of, hypothetically, of the city erasing that debt. Are we even paying that debt? I mean, we're saying that we're not paying debt service. Have we paid anything on that in the last 3 years?
We haven't paid anything in the last 3 years.
So even if the city wiped out the $5 million, it's not going to increase our.
It would only makes an impact when we are making not just hundreds of thousands of dollars, but millions of dollars when we make those repayments. If we make improvements incrementally in regards to $100,000 here, $100,000 there, that doesn't get us to where we need to go. We need to make either reduce our overhead and reduce the amount of courses that we have, or find a whole lot more revenue.
I understand that, but I'm just saying that because we're not making the debt service payment, that $5 million is irrelevant at this point. If the city wiped it out,
Right.
we're not making that payment anyways.
Today, we're not making that payment. It just extends it out. Instead of being a 30-year repayment, it becomes a 40, 50-year repayment.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure we weren't counting or calculating money that we're not. So, any other questions?
I have one. Financially, it makes sense to not have, McDonald branded gear and stuff in the clubhouse because we don't know what the future of this is. Can we request that it at least be stocked with the essentials to play golf balls, tees? I keep hearing a lot about that. I think that for one, that's easy money, but people need to play it, and if it doesn't sell, if things change in McDonald, it can easily be taken to another course.
So we made that happen already from the last meeting. With the unknowns that we were having in regards to Clapp and McDonald, moving some staff around, and it's actually the staff that, the golf pros that actually make that investment. It doesn't actually come from the city. The golf pros actually make that investment, and so we didn't want them to make an investment and all of a sudden pull the rug from underneath them. However, we have made some arrangements to have all the necessities to be there. Gloves, balls, tees, you name it, it's there.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Well, the point of this meeting was to decide if we were going to do an RFP, and if we were going to do an RFP, what did this board want to see in that RFP? Assuming that we put out an RFP, is there any additions, subtractions that anybody would like to see in that RFP? I think, Tori, you mentioned, the deed and not being able to. I mean, we need to make sure that's spelled out in this RFP which I think it is, that they cannot sell it back. Eddie made a suggestion, or not a suggestion, but a statement earlier to me. If this were to go out and if it were to be sold, if they ran the golf course into the ground, I think Scott said we'd pay, we'd get first right of refusal of what they paid for the course, but could we put in recourse for if they just decided to have a bulldozer track in there and tear up the golf course? It's not a golf course when we get it back. I mean, would we just get it back? I mean, could we put in, certainly we're not going to pay the same money if he tears it up, if it's worse than when we left it. You know what I'm saying? Can we put in those kind of recourses that, mean, if it's gotta say a public golf course, it's gotta say a public golf course, that's the rule. But if his idea of a public golf course is four-wheel drive golf carts that tear up the fairways and everything else, and then we get it back, certainly
again-
don't wanna pay.
I think that's something that's negotiated at the contract.
So we wouldn't need to put that in the RFP that,
I don't think so. I think that's something that you would want to negotiate into the contract.
Is the park board part of that contractual process?
Yes, they are.
yeah, it's RFP.
Very much so.
Thank you.
Not to say that a developer would run the course into the ground.
No.
I just want to.
I agree, just wanna make sure we protect ourselves, I mean, I don't wanna get it back, if we get it back in 3 years and it's,
We do something very similar in regards to a lot of the facilities that we rent. And I would kind of think about it as that, here's the expectation that we expect the course to come back, and we could put that into the contract is, if it's not the same as we sold it to you, and that's part of the contract, we would say we would want some calculation to be in place for that.
is there anything in the oh, go ahead, Hoyt.
I'd like to ask about the potential timeline on this. If we did end up getting a bid back and then we spent some time negotiating, would there be extra meetings involved in, say, December, January, February, March to finish the negotiations?
I think that'd be up to us.
What are we looking at for time? And would this give maybe the Golf Advisory Board some more time to develop their master plan once they understood where we were at?
Mr. Chairman, if I can answer that question. In a typical RFP, you want to put it out there, and that's one of my questions I was going to ask this group as I started here the discussion about, is there going to retreat? When would this come forward? Is we can adjust the dates as you see fit. Currently, the submittal date is November 23rd. So that's when you get the submittals in. Then obviously there would be a review committee. I know there's been some discussion, is it the entire Parks Board or is it a small group of the Parks Board who then reports to the larger Parks Board and say, hey, we had 3 submittals, here's the different variables. Our recommendation is to accept this one or reject them all or go back out. It's really a question of how you want to structure that timeline. I will say this as far as a recommendation is, if you have those discussions about a retreat and you're weighing different opportunities, regardless of what it is, I think there's a value to understanding what have been the submittals, what are the amounts of financial compensation they're willing to provide. That can help weigh in your decision about how to move forward with the golf program on a macro level, not just, hey, we did a retreat, here's our thoughts, without knowing the potential impact a sale could have.
Well, we would not be part of this committee, with the exception of Eddie, who's the chair of the Golf Advisory Committee, are the ones that are having the retreat.
Okay.
We wouldn't be part of that.
But as far as the RFP, it's up to you who serves on that selection committee. It could be the entire board, it could be a smaller group of the board, or else you could even select staff or somebody else to serve on that committee as well to review the proposals. And that can be the recommendation to the entire board, or if the entire board serves that selection committee, then you guys can make the recommendation either to accept one or reject them all, or even go back out with further requirements or changes.
But we can decide that after whether we decide to do an RFP or not.
Yeah, so whatever date you seek to set as the submission deadline, when they actually have to submit their deadlines unto you, you want to provide a reasonable timeline that they can expect an answer back. Because they're gonna price it based on, for example, for a golf course, they're thinking if I'm gonna submit something, let's just say December time period, they're trying to project out when they could take ownership and actually run the golf course. So the longer you take, they have to figure that into their calculations. So generally when you do an RFP, you want to provide a pretty, I'll call it 60-day, 90-day window when they're going to hear whether it's up or down if they're the final applicant. Within probably 30 days after submitting the proposals, they're going to want to hear, are they shortlisted or not shortlisted?
Well, I think we could provide that, especially given 60 days, 90 days, okay. So, stay there. if there was an RFP, is there anything in this RFP that we want to make sure is in here? Tori's recommendation on that was
The development.
that just stays golf, and that was Bill.
I don't see any problem with development as long as it helps the golf course.
Supplements the
Kind of like what you were
players.
saying.
Let's-
Yeah, the
Like a
wedding-
complementary
Let's
use.
define
Yeah.
development though. I mean, at the clubhouse, or are you talking frontage, are you talking?
Apartments or whatever, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not
that's gonna be
opposed.
pretty broad.
I
feel
like it's gotta say golf
Well, but it doesn't have to be, I don't believe it has to be brought in RFP. I mean, I think there's potential in a clubhouse for, if they wanted to do weddings and stuff, and certainly they're gonna change that clubhouse, right? So is that considered development, or is that considered remodel? Is that, I know it's permitting, but is it zone change? Is it?
It's up to the Parks Board how you want to define that. For example, you could say in this area is the only area eligible, I'll call it, for renovation or redevelopment. Let's just say, for lack of better areas, that area south of the current clubhouse. Say that area is open for development, everything else, it's non-redevelopable. And then if you wanted to say the acceptable uses for development within that area could be X, Y, Z. If you want to put a prohibition on, let's say, residential, or I'll call it I don't know, some other type of uses, you could put that in there.
Scott, is there any piece of this golf course that falls into an opportunity zone?
Great question. If I was upstairs, I could be able to pull up the map.
Here, I got it for you.
What's that?
I have it.
Do you?
Yeah, I got the opportunity zone map.
If you go to the state of Kansas, or you can go to our website, City of Wichita Eco Devo, we have a page on incentives. You can go pull up the opportunity zone map.
Doesn't look like it is.
Kind of looks like it's right on the outer edge there.
This is.
I think that's the street.
This is Mac,
Right.
It's
right?
hard to tell exactly what
Yeah,
it means.
so side by side. This is fun. That's the little area right there that I'm wondering if that's
That's all residential already.
south of the clubhouse.
Well, just for our own edification, if it is in an opportunity zone, what does that suggest?
I could get in quite a long discussion about opportunity zones. It's a program where people can invest capital gains into new areas in order to prompt new redevelopment in that area. We're still waiting for Treasury direction from the feds on how exactly opportunity zones work. Those are just starting to roll out. But the concept is individuals, or I'll call it fund groups, that have allocations of excess capital gains, they could then invest those into those opportunity zones with tax breaks coming as part of that. It's an opportunity to help reinvestment occur within especially low mod distressed areas.
But that wouldn't affect this anyways. That's outside the golf course.
That's what we're just double checking. It's good to tell them exactly.
May I suggest that we simply make a recommendation in the RFP that any developments on the 146 acres would be to the enhancement of the golf experience, and just leave it like that. And that gives them some flexibility about where they want to rebuild a new golf course, or whether they want to do golf clubhouse or anything else, restrooms, other kinds of things. That just makes it simple.
I would think we'd need to be more restrictive and say, if we're gonna allow any kind of development, it's gotta be like the clubhouse, I mean, that area. I think if you say future, I mean, who are we to decide if that's good for the golf course, bad for the golf course? A little quick trip out on the corner or something. I mean, I think that's a pretty gray area. I think we need to define, if we're gonna allow that, where? The clubhouse would be about the only opportunity.
Right.
Well, I think we already indicated that we were going to keep all 146 acres as a green space for the purpose of golfing. If not, that should be part of that process. But how they, they may want to put another restroom out there. There's only one exterior to the clubhouse right now. They may want another restroom. They may want some lighting, play a little bit later in the winter. They may want to do a variety of things. As long as it's golf related, I don't have a problem with it.
Question, what do we, we're putting this in the RFP that we want the 146 acres, whatever the size is, to remain a green space, a golf course. What's stopping us, what's stopping them, I guess, whoever it is, assuming if this RFP process goes on and whoever wins it, whoever takes over this course, what tools do we have to stop them from redeveloping along 13th Street? Or, I mean, what's...
Sure. Mr. Chairman, if I could respond to that, and law can certainly jump into this. Typically on purchase and sale agreement, within that contract, you can put certain deed restrictions or covenants that say this property can be only used for this. And for example, if you wanted to say in this purchase and sale agreement that property must be maintained as a public golf course, the 18-hole public golf course, you could put that, and that would be a deed restriction to purchase and sale. So whether they took ownership and then down the road try to sell it again, that deed restriction would remain on that. I'm happy with law if you want to jump in. Or.
Right. If they started building a convenience store, for example, in violation, you'd have to go to court, get a temporary restraining order or stop it in development.
So if I can jump in, so if the question is, hey, they could do commercial development as long as it's complementary, that's pretty broad. If you have certain ideas, when you say complementary to golf, I can have people sit in front of me and say, hey, that quick trip is complimentary because I'm going to get a drink beforehand or drink after. Versus if you wanted to say, I wanted to do a reception center to do weddings and events, those type of things. Or, for example, I came from the Phoenix area, which was at golf courses, small reception centers, and it was the classic, hey, we need to do an annual business retreat, which ended up being like an hour worth of business meetings, and then you go out and play golf. And they might have, 10 to 12 casitas, or I'll call it suites, that people could, rent overnight for that corporate meeting. They do their meeting, and then they play golf the rest of the new days. So if you're going to talk about commercial development, if you want to make sure you get the right type of development, it might be good to say, hey, if it's, reception venue centers or small, other types of uses. And then as well as if you're concerned about 13th Street frontage, if you want to define a certain area where that would be eligible for redevelopment, you could do so. So I hope that maybe answers some questions to you.
Thank you.
Anything else? Any additions? I mean, Bill, I talked to Bill, he's out of the country, and he just put that he would like to see the RFP would like it to be restrictive in nature so that it cannot be further commercially developed, just as you were saying. Maintain all green spaces as green space and always be a public golf course. So I think that's in here today.
I think the only clarification that the entire property is 146 acres. But if the Parks Board decides a certain portion could be redeveloped for, I'll call it golf complementary uses, you probably need to designate that redevelopment could only happen within that portion of the 146 acres.
Okay.
Because I heard some talks, well, if it's 146 acres, they can't do anything else for redevelopment. So if you're going to say certain areas are open, then we just need to designate that.
I mean, I would like to see, if an RFP, if we're talking about the RFP, if we're back to the RFP talk, I would like to see that in the RFP that it says that the only redevelopment, permitted and approved is the clubhouse area, and then the bathhouse or the bathroom, the one bathroom out there would probably need to be.
Yeah, I would probably turn that as kind of essential to the public golf course. I don't think we'd have an opposition to somebody wanting to put an additional.
I wouldn't think so.
Restroom out on hole 9 or something like that. I think it's the commercial. What I think the Parks Board is talking about is the commercial development of certain properties within that.
Right. So I'd like to see that added.
How many square feet is eligible to be redeveloped? And we have 18 holes, public golf course, right? And that falls on how many acres of land?
146 is the entire
146 acres.
property.
Right. So I can't imagine anyone having too much commercial development land in general. We can put in there, I think, we want the frontage to remain golf course up along 13th or something like that, but I think the RFP as is pretty
So,
solid.
in the RFP, it does mention 7,500 square feet of clubhouse. Also, it speaks of the maintenance is approximately 7,500 square feet as well. And then one restroom on the golf course, it's 320 square feet. So
So that would all
just
fall under the,
just a suggestion would be maybe you use square footage amounts to help define some restrictions. So it's just an idea. I don't know. I'm just trying to throw some ideas to help you guys out. So a maximum amount of X is the amount of square footage allowed or something like that.
How long would it take for you to tweak some of the RFP items that we've discussed today and get it back to us?
We could probably have something back to you early to mid next week. These are they're easy to insert. One of the things we might be able to do to help this discussion about the commercial is we could go back with Troy in the map and identify, maybe call out kind of like a red square. This is the only area available for commercial redevelopment.
Yeah.
And that could give us a square footage or the size of that.
And I think we can lay that out today. I don't know that we need to reconvene. I mean, as long as it's spelled out the way we're spelling it out today, if we decide to move forward with this, then I don't think we need another meeting.
yep. Speed of the government's already gotten in the way, so let's keep it moving.
So, I mean, anything else on this? Any other changes?
She has a question.
No.
I'm sorry, I just haven't heard anything in respect to the first T's agreement with
It's already in here.
That's already
It's
implemented.
already
in
implemented.
here.
with some specifics?
It
Yes.
says we honor their contract.
Okay, but the
Their
contract is
agreement.
pretty open. I mean, like, there's not anything that says the kids have, to my knowledge, have the rights, you know, the program and bring them in to
What's
play
the
on
agreement
the
dated
course
March 4th?
certain amount of time, so many days, or is this gonna be like the soccer
that's
facility, where the city gave them 10 days to get on the course? You know, there kind of needs to be something to protect them.
So one quick question,
a little bit, too.
Mr. Hendricks, does the current agreement give specifics right now for the amount of kids or the amount of time or the special location or times right now? So we were just going to be working with them on a case-by-case situation, and they'd have to work in this, if this wasn't put in here, they would have to work with the future owner to make that happen?
Yeah.
Okay.
And they did not allow.
But currently, we don't have that in our agreement right now.
Current contract.
Right.
May I? There is a lease, which is what is going to run with the land, or what we're going to ask run with the land. And that will have to be assigned through a formal process through the county and recorded, so that it will run with the land if they resell it to someone else. We also have a use agreement, a non-exclusive use agreement, which sets forth more of the specifics of what the, the agreement for the use of it. And if this board wants to include that as well, I saw it referenced in here. Was that the intent, to include the use agreement as well? I mean, we set an actual amount of money, and I'm not sure that we can be that restrictive. I suppose we can do whatever we want to do, or the board can do whatever they want to do, but they're two separate documents.
I mean, could we put in that the buyer, I mean, as part of the RFP, that they would make, that obviously they're going to have to take the lease And they're gonna be able to negotiate on that lease when they transfer it, right? And at that time, First Tee can negotiate.
Well, the lease does not have the use
Right, but I'm
specifics
just saying,
in it.
as the city assigned, or we assign this lease to the new owner would have the opportunity with First Tee to negotiate dates or times, or would it be, I mean, we don't have it in there now.
No.
We don't have any of that
The
in our
lease,
contract.
your indication was that you wanted to have the new owner honor the terms of the lease as it is.
Right.
So there would be no negotiating. You're talking about the use, what they're allowed to do on the property. The lease is for the physical building and the land that they're building. The use agreement was for, the cost, what would be charged for the kids to use. Troy, help me out. There's some other, I'm sorry, I didn't bring that with me and I should have. But it's the same as with all, it read the same as with all of our courses. Right, that the kids can have access and things like that. Now that, yes, that would, I would think would have to be negotiated with the
Yeah, but if they
new owner.
wanted, if First Tee wanted that specific in their contract, they'd have to negotiate.
Okay, well, we could just add a word there. I mean, it says, any parties submitting a proposal agree to honor the First Tee of Greater Wichita's lease and student participation agreement or something, whatever our lawyer wants to stick in there, Elizabeth, dated March 14th, 2018.
That would, again, that can go in there. I would defer to Mr. Rigby as to whether or not that's, your thoughts on that. Because that isn't part of the lease.
So the question you're asking is the actual use of the golf course now. It's one part to say, hey, we're open to selling it. We would potentially put restrictions on where you could redevelop it. Now we're actually getting to the question of how they actually can use that golf course. And that gets to become a difficult situation. If they're trying to run the golf course and make it profitable, as evidenced by us, where we're having struggles ourselves to make it be profitable, they're trying to take it on as a private entity to run a public golf course as a deed restriction. They still have to make money. The more restrictions and stipulations you put on them about when and how and who can at what times, that becomes a very difficult thing for them to try and calculate as far as they're trying to permit a proposal to us.
And that's why we didn't put it in ours, the city didn't put, or the park board didn't put it in our original proposal to them, because if we're all of a sudden a great big golf course everybody's using, we're gonna have our paying customers ahead of the kids most of the time anyways. I mean.
I will make a comment, the lease itself that we entered into with First Tee did have a provision that it runs with the home, and that it would be in perpetuity regardless, of the owner. The use agreement has no such provision. So, is it in there now? No, it's not.
But what would be interesting to see as these bidders come back, if they're truly interested and they really understand what the golf course is all about, they're going to come back with some information or some kind of, that's going to be part of their bid. This is what they're going to do for First Tee. That's what I would expect. So, and that would only make their bid stronger and better if they had some kind of information in there about how they're going to interact, support, manage that situation.
You could make it part of the RFP that they include in their presentation, how they would accommodate the First Tee usage, and have them pitch you a proposal. They may have a whole different idea that's better than what we're doing now, who knows?
Well, yeah.
And just have that be a requirement, and that they give you some sort of, what they're thinking about.
I think Tom's here. I thought I saw Tom here.
Yeah, he's back there. Yep.
Oh, what's your thoughts on that? I mean, if we.
I agree with Elizabeth on it. Anything that we can do or anything that the city or the park board can do in requiring, some response from a potential buyer to give us a general idea of what they want to do for us, for the First Tee, we're all for it.
That's
terrific.
That's our biggest concern is we have a relationship with the city. We know what that's about. We have no idea what happened with the new third-party owner.
Right.
And so if you can clarify that in the RFP, by all means, please.
But yeah, I mean, I think we'd like to ask them to come back with how they would respond to First Tee and their usage needs.
I think we say here that the lease is available for them to review. We should also make our use agreement available. If it's not in
Yeah,
here.
it's not on here.
I thought I saw it, but now I'm
I
not
don't
finding
see it on
it.
here,
So
not the usage one.
that could be another document that's available for them to look at so they can see this is what the city contemplated and we're wanting to know what you would do.
So the use agreement is not exclusive use on any of the city golf courses.
Well, I'm saying, we
Yeah.
have agreements on, do we have them on all techs?
and
MAC, and we had them at CLAP.
No.
I thought we had an agreement on CLAP. Okay.
Decide any one of the program.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. But they're the same. The agreement's very, very similar on both of them as far as what it contemplates. And then whoever is looking at making a bid could then look at this and say, well, you know, this is kind of what we'd like to hear how you would, you know, how you would accommodate this group in your use agreement. I don't word these things, you do. So if it's something of that nature, if the board wants that put in there.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I'm just making that suggestion to you.
I think it'd be important to make sure that First Tee is comfortable with this as much as the board, just because they have an investment in that facility too, so they have some stake in that game, so.
Yeah, I agree.
Anything
Great,
else?
if we can put that in the RFP, that would be terrific. Give them a better understanding of whoever gets this, if we do decide to move forward with it. It would give them a better understanding of where they're gonna be.
Right.
So,
Anything?
thank you for bringing that up.
One side, they're sharing the
Yeah.
driving range too, and, you know, he has control over, someone will have control over that too. I should say, over between, peak hours or.
Right, well, we'll be able
They
to,
have a nice agreement with the city.
we'll be able to see that in the RFP. So, yeah.
So if I can ask a clarification question. So the question isn't necessarily, obviously, the First Tee lease dated March 14th, they've got to abide by. On a non-exclusive, we're simply asking them to respond, how would they work with First Tee?
On the usage.
On the usage part. Not necessarily whether they'll use the same terms listed underneath the non-exclusives, but how would they interact and partner with First Tee?
Correct.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Anybody else? Anything else?
I think just getting something out there, for the most part, we're kind of on the same understanding on a lot of different issues, but it's going to take a lot of time to spell those out specifically. So putting this out and letting people submit a proposal, from there we still have room to negotiate, add the fine print, make sure First Tee is taken care of, and go from there.
Well, we also want to hear what the Golf Advisory Committee
Right,
comes back
right.
with. I mean, all this would be
And make sure that's
concurrent.
worked into it.
So does anybody want to make a motion then? Or do we want to talk about it? Mr. Goder, sorry.
My question is fallback, partially. If there is non-performance and the city wants to provision for a resolution of that, does the city to buy it back from the developer then?
The current proposal of the Parks Board, the way it's written is they have a right of first refusal. They could choose to purchase it back, or they could choose not to take action, or they could choose to together negotiate it.
Question I have, you own the property, you have the exclusive right to sell it. You sell it, the money goes, you don't have a bank account. The money goes to the city.
No.
Where does the money go?
We would like to see the money come back into the golf system.
But that's not, you don't control that financially.
Yes, we do. It's a sale, right? It's our property.
Golf
Well, the enterprise fund, golf, I'm sorry.
You have a bank account, that's money goes into, that's under your control.
Well, the Gulf Enterprise has it doesn't have it. Huh?
We don't have a bank account.
I think he's trying to ask, how are we gonna buy this land back if we have to buy it back?
Exactly. If you had to go back and you obligate the city to put up the money to buy it back, I don't think that would be.
That is the intent. I guess that's how would we word that?
You obligate the city, put that money, and you really couldn't spend the money until you had a reserve to cover your loan.
We need to appreciate the value.
Are you obligating the city council to do something that's outside of your authority? I don't know. That's just, it's confusing. This is a confusing area because of the nature of the beast.
Well, yeah, we've never had this before.
But if the money goes to the city, it's gone. You don't have no control.
And that's part of what I was saying is the details that would be worked out if we decide to move forward or if we find an offer. We
You
can,
obligate, you make the deal yourself.
it's first right of
You
refusal.
have total control of the sale. But once the money's there, it appears you lose control of everything.
So, it would need to go.
We'd have to put that into the contract
Yeah. I don't think we can.
So then it would be council approval on top of all of this anyways.
Well, yeah, they don't need to approve the sale,
No, no, no.
but the clawback is, if we're going to use city money. But the Gulf Enterprise Fund can buy property too.
If we can afford it.
Right now, we've got 160,000
Yeah, right.
in our reserves.
Right, and Dale points out that the money would have to be held as a backstop in case we had to claw it back. But the hope would be that the system would be profitable and we would be building the reserve should something like that happen. But you're right, it would probably need to be worded that it go to, that the Gulf Enterprise Fund would have the right of first refusal.
Things go really bad. You don't want things to go bad. If they did, the first key is now in this process. Where does the fiduciary responsibility fall for that kind of liability?
I'm sorry, I can't answer that for you now. This is new ground, never been done. But that's something that we should look at and put in the contract
But that's when we get to the contract.
Yeah.
if needed.
So right now, we're talking about an RFP, and what's in the RFP, that wouldn't necessarily have to be in the RFP. Because they're relevant to the buyer, that's between us and city council and.
We might
and
want to
legal.
change the language that the city would have the right of first refusal to purchase the property. So,
What are the pleasure of the? So
Change
that-
it to the park board or the Gulf Enterprise Fund would have
Yeah.
the right of first refusal.
Is that,
Yeah.
unless you want to seek I think we need the approval of the council to do anything else, or to make it the city.
But again, we could, if we decide to move forward with the RFP, that'll be in the contract, and that'll be dealt with. I mean, it could all get squashed at that point, I suppose, too. There's,
And we can look into how to best word that.
right,
Yeah, wouldn't the city council have to approve the RFP then?
no, it's our property. The only thing they'd have to approve is if we had to buy or if the Gulf Enterprise was gonna buy the property back and didn't have the money, the city would be on the hook to
If
buy
the
it.
city's on the hook to buy it back in the RFP, wouldn't they have to approve it?
The park board is first right of refusal, or the Gulf Enterprise Fund have first right of refusal on the park, on it.
The city would not have first right.
Okay, sorry. Sorry, Tyler, you didn't get all that. Okay, is there anything else?
You ready to make a motion?
You want me to make a motion?
Yeah, go for it.
I'll make a motion. What?
Just go.
I make a motion that we, I'm talking loud. I make a motion that we put out the RFP to sell the property at McDonald Golf Course with the changes that we made today,
And in concurrence, or with an allegiance.
and in concurrence with what the Golf Advisory Committee comes up with. So that's not part of the RFP, but we'll get their report and decide before we decide.
Do we need two separate motions there?
Yeah. you
Okay,
might.
okay.
I think that would be easier, because
Do you want me to make the motion for the Golf
two,
Advisory Committee?
you've got
Yeah,
two
so
things
the
going
first-
on.
Don't make a decision until we.
The first one then is, I make a motion to put the RFP out for the sale of McDonald Golf Course as corrected or as changed today. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Passes. Now,
I will make a motion that the Golf Advisory Committee will meet here in the next few weeks to come up with a proposal or a plan and present it to the park board so that we have a better understanding, we as a park board have a better understanding of how, like line breakouts and how everything matches up. So we have a better understanding of what is going on.
Would that be
what's that?
December
Is that
10th?
a motion?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a motion. but-
Well, you're making a motion that another board do something.
That we don't make a decision.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
We don't make a decision.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
So all
yeah,
that,
You'll receive the proposal that's prepared by the Golf Advisory
Okay.
Committee and consider that
yeah,
as that information
yeah, what you said.
in connection with the RFP.
Is there a
Yeah,
second?
I'll second.
Can I ask a clarification question?
No. Yes, we can.
Just so, as we draft this corrected RFP, maybe clarify for staff is, we have a submission deadline currently stated for November 23rd, and a final selection of development team on or before December 10th. And just trying to get clarification, does that still work, or do we need to adjust that, or?
Sounds like we need to adjust that. 10th, right?
You think we need to adjust it?
I think we can get it done.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you guys think out there? Tom, you see Tom, anybody else? Cindy?
I mean, they're
You
gonna
think
have
we can
it.
do that night before?
The Golf Advisory Committee, I mean, we can get it.
Yeah, so sometime before November 23rd, we'll have it. And then,
Doesn't give us time now.
how much time do we need?
Are
2
you
weeks.
going to have a special meeting then to consider it? Because your next meeting isn't until December 10th, and that's the date that the proposals are due, or the
No, the
decision.
proposals are due November 23rd.
23rd.
What this says is the Parks Board will make a determination whether to accept a recommendation or reject or take no action. But right now, it's currently stating December 10th, there will be a decision. This gets back to my comment is, when you put an RFP out, the respondents they need to know when to expect a response.
Well, and we can get the RFPs and have them for December 10th, and or that board will review them and make their recommendation. And then at the same time, we'll have their recommendations, and at that time, we have to decide what direction we're going. I don't want to.
Thanks for the clarification.
Okay. So there was a motion
And a
and a
second.
second. Did we do a vote? I can't remember now. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. So, all right, that's it. Thank you, everybody. Thank you guys for coming in on Friday afternoon to do this. Well, do you want anything? You don't have anything, Troy? So we adjourn.
They're willing to.